Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jennie Johnson,
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
and we are super excited for this evening's guest, return guest. She's been with us before, but she has come back and she has a super fascinating topic and something very important
Mhm.
that she is discussing with us tonight, especially if you are doing preservation on the East Coast or even in some of the southern states and some of those southern cemeteries, because they have the same problem, I know. Um, Diane and I were just saying we don't see it as much out here, at least not in Colorado, but I'm
It's
sure it happens,
it has happened out here.
yeah, on
Yep.
occasion here and even in other Western states. But I definitely know that the problem we're about to discuss is something I've seen happen frequently on the East Coast, especially in the New England area, because you guys have a million and one cemeteries out there. Um, and in the South, it comes up a lot too. So we would like to welcome back to the show for
Rach,
the second time.
oh, Rachel Meyer of Epoch Preservation. Um, yeah, I was gonna say you're out of Ipswich, but you're probably all over the place over there. So
Yes. Yeah, the last
Yes,
time
I
you came
definitely
on,
can.
you were telling us how you had just taken on a new project. So
I definitely consider myself out of Ipswich for
it kind of
sure.
started there and then it branched out and you've like spider webbed all over your area.
It did, but Ipswich is definitely my hidey hole. It's where I come back to whenever things get too
oh,
much out there in the big world.
I love
yeah.
it.
I do too.
Ipswich is such
Well,
a nice little like area in all of the bigger, broader world of Massachusetts too.
it is. It is. Well, I'm so grateful that you guys asked me to come back. I'm really excited about this piece of legislation that I want to tell you about because I think that it'll be a bit of a game changer for those who fight for saving, gravestones and, you know, I
Well, and I
think the
think
more people know, the better.
Yeah, definitely.
this will be a good lesson. And of course, you're just kind of in the getting started phase of all of this, but there's definitely needs to be more legislation when it comes to the preservation stuff in certain cases because it's not there. Like the amount of people doing preservation work now and stuff is definitely increasing from what it was even 10 years ago. But when we start doing all of this stuff and we enter these cemeteries and we're dealing with the headstones and we're trying to deal with the genealogy, there's a lot of things that still require guesswork. And then when people reach out and they're like, well, how do I go about this? What do I go about? There's no like real
Set.
legal system for a lot of
Right.
things. And so
Mhm.
I think what you're doing now will be definitely a good step forward for other preservation projects in the future and other issues that we run into on a regular basis in the preservation world. But this one very specifically, I know I think our listeners, especially the ones again who are very involved in preservation, are going to take interest in. And I'm hoping more and more people are going to hear about it so that we can make it
I
a
support you.
not just like in your state, but like
Right.
national across the
Exactly.
board.
Yes. Yeah,
So
I
tell us
agree.
what this bill is that you are working on and how you came to even want to do this particular piece of legislation. I mean, this is like politics. This isn't just going into the cemetery and cleaning it up and fixing the headstones. You've now entered the world of politics.
Yes. And I think it's a world that I more or less belong in. But so the bill number for anybody who wants to look it up is SD 2426, and it is a bill about the theft of graves. So it's not just, the theft and selling of gravestones, but also of other cemetery objects. I'm going to put it up on the screen.
I'm so excited about this bill, if you can't tell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so just to read it to you is Bill SD 2426, and this is as it's written currently. It hasn't gone into committee yet. The committees are still being formed. So section one, and this is assuming there will be other addendums to this law as
Right.
we discover what does and does not work and where people find loopholes. But notwithstanding any special or general law to the contrary, no person shall possess or sell, offer for sale, or attempt to sell, or transfer, or dispose of any monument, gravestone, marker, or other structure, or any portion or fragment thereof, placed or designed for a memorial of the dead, or any fence, railing, gate, plot delineator, or curb, knowing or having reasonable cause to know that it has been unlawfully removed from a cemetery or burial ground.
I mean, you covered everything.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually a real cookie cutter law. Back in the 1980s, like 1987, New Hampshire already adopted this law. Maine has this law. For some reason, Massachusetts is just behind. So a lot of this language was already written, which makes me
Nice.
feel hopeful that it will pass, and is probably part of the reason why we have such a robust oddities market in Massachusetts and not in New Hampshire and not in Maine,
Oh,
is because
Right.
it's easier to sell things here without people thinking it's weird, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that this bill will, in a way, end the oddities market for cemetery objects. The one addendum that I do kind of want to add to the bill is a chain of custody clause where it's up to the seller or the person in possession to track the chain of custody from its removal from a burying ground. That's
Mm-hmm.
a big loophole in this law because right now how it's written is that reasonable suspicion that it has been unlawfully taken.
right.
Right.
That's a real gray area of how does one suspect that? Is it enough that I say I suspect it? So
Mm-hmm.
I think having in that law some language about proof of, provenance is an important thing to add.
Right. And this is different than, say, somebody who, because there are plenty of people who like to recreate the headstones that we find in the cemeteries, but they're leaving the actual stone or the actual monument or whatever it is in the cemetery. They're not taking it out of the cemetery, they're photographing it or whatever and recreating it. And that's different than actually removing the stones and or other
Yeah, the
objects.
lawyer I'm working with asked me if there are reasons why somebody would lawfully sell a
Mm-hmm.
gravestone. And I want to argue that there's no moral reason to try to use a gravestone to make money off of it. It is a sacred object as opposed to selling just about anything else. It's not really, was never really meant to be monetized.
Right.
But there are reasons why gravestones would be removed from a cemetery, such as, say you had somebody who died and then 100 years later, five other people died and they were put on a new monument, all of them.
Mhm.
And that gravestone was removed and given to the family or, what have you, thrown in a ditch. Um, and that family member that it was given to died, and suddenly there's this unexplained gravestone just floating around, and you have no idea if it was lawfully or unlawfully come about. You just don't know because
Mm-hmm.
so many generations have passed since it was
Right.
removed. Or
Nobody would know.
another real shady gray area is, say, like during the WPA era, where a lot of footstones were taken out of the ground
Yep.
to make mowing easier and were just thrown
Discarded.
away
Yeah.
or buried in weird places or whatever. There's a reason why those might be floating out. But my argument to that too is back during the WPA era, which was almost 100 years ago, we
Mm-hmm.
had much different opinions about burying places.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that decision unlikely would be made today, you
Oh,
know?
At least doing it the way they did it. Yeah.
but then that was
Yeah.
well, it wasn't intentional theft. It was more just unintentional ignorance to what they were doing because preservation wasn't an important thing then, especially for a cemetery. That's
Right. So how do we save those footstones? The way to save them is to insist that there's a provenance. And if you can't prove that why
right.
that object was taken, then we can question it. We can say, let's revisit it, find out where it goes, and ask the powers that be in that town or city if they would like it reinstalled in their burying ground.
Right. Yeah.
Just
I,
having to take responsibility from when you find things, see things, or offer things. Because every once in a while, there was a time where you could find stuff for on eBay because there was Halloween decorations. And then we were looking keeping an eye on that for a while. And there's stuff here that has come up that either stones were removed from this section because this one area has decided that they wanted to take all the stones out and just put plaques up. And so the stones ended up in people's basements as foundation. But if you didn't know the history, and yeah, so that's important to
I mean,
know
there are
where you're buying
well-meaning
stuff too.
reasons, right? Like
Oh
it's
yeah.
not all we want. Some of it is still theft. But say in Salem, a tour guide comes through the burying ground and they're like, we want to take this fragment so nobody steals it. But they've stolen it.
Right.
And they may or may not tell somebody about it ever. It may just sit in their house. And so, how do these things end up out in the world? And how do we track them in a way that they don't lose their provenance and they don't just sort of end up at an oddities market when people die and no one left a little granny
Right.
note on it, you know?
Right.
Yeah,
No,
'cause
I think
very
that's
unique
an
items show up at oddity shows.
Huh?
I said very unique items show up at oddity shows.
which is why they're called oddity shows, but
I mean, God bless them, but don't bring me to an oddities fair unless you want me to ruin your good time. You know, like I have a very singular mission and I have called the cops on vendors. I've done whatever I've had to do, you know, because we don't have this law in Massachusetts, though. If the oddities market was in Massachusetts, there was very little I could actually do about it.
right.
Uh, you know, the the thing being though is sometimes in the case that one of the cases I recently came across, because this happens about a dozen times a year for me, where somebody's like, here's a gravestone, please put it like give it a home. You know, this happens a lot.
You're like,
Um, was one that was probably, I know exactly where it goes. It was removed from a burying ground. It was here. I'll share a photo. Let's see. These, this is a footstone
Oh
for
wow.
James Foster. It was removed from the burying ground by somebody and it was brought to their home and the home was that of the Foster family. And when this person passed away, he was a famous writer. The children were just like, auction everything off. And this
oh,
gravestone ended up in the auction. And the auction, thank goodness for this little footstone or the fragments of it, was held in New Hampshire where there is a law. So even though it's a Massachusetts gravestone, the Massachusetts auction house was auctioning it off in New Hampshire. So I was able to stop it.
So that's good.
yeah.
Well, people are ignorant too. They just, I don't know. It's just here at the cemetery here, people see an old stone, and it's not as bad as it was, but for a while there, people were just, it's nobody's there, nobody comes to visit. We'll just take this Victorian piece of, you know, marker home because
hmm
I don't know
Or the
what they're
piece of the
thinking.
fence or
Fence,
the
yes, the
iron railing.
fences.
There's so many
Mhm.
those iron fences, which I know, back during the war, during World War
Right.
II, I should specify which war. I know we
Yeah.
took a lot of them out because we were melting that down and using that metal in the war effort. And that was
Mhm.
something that was promoted by the government. And, but, we're looking for all of the resources we had to fight this big world war. But how many of those pieces didn't make it into the war effort and didn't go towards it? Like who
Oh.
stole it and just kind of hung on to pieces?
Mhm.
And where are those pieces now? And granted, the fencing may not be quite as sacred as the headstone that's going to tell us who and what and where, but it was still originally intended to be part of somebody's grave or a family's grave, and usually,
Mhm.
an entire plot that holds the
Well,
whole
it's like,
family. And so,
yeah, it's like removing a historic artifact from a site,
right.
because it is part of that historic
Yeah, you
site.
don't just go to an archaeological dig and start pulling stuff away from the site and being like, hey, I think this looks really cool. I'm going to take
Yeah.
it home. That's not allowed in most cases. And the same thing should apply to the cemeteries.
But we have to differentiate between everyday objects and sacred objects. And
Right.
we have rules. We have NAGPRA, which protects sacred objects of Native American people that need to be
Mm-hmm.
repatriated. There was recently an argument for the same with African American burial objects and
Yep.
similar sacred objects. I'm not arguing that white people need that. That's an equity issue that I don't even want to touch. But I think that we've established that burial objects are sacred
Right.
objects, just based on how we feel so strongly about these other laws. And
Hmm.
so we can differentiate pretty easily when it comes to somebody just selling something that was meant to be ephemeral, like maybe a cemetery or a funeral card or a
Right.
Well,
mourning
yeah,
jewelry,
that's
things that were meant to be ephemeral as opposed to things that were installed in
in the ground.
perpetuity,
Right.
So it is a conversation about what do we consider sacred in this country. And I think these conversations about what's sacred are incredibly important because I feel like and I know that we always end up in this space where we're talking about our country, but I feel like in a lot of ways our country has lost its sense of respect. And this is one of the ways that we can say, hey, it doesn't matter what your background, we've all lost people, and
Hmm.
we should all care about respecting them and making sure their graves aren't desecrated.
Right.
And
I would agree
it's
more than
important
that.
to
Yeah.
note that as liberal as I am, this bill is actually filed by a Republican senator.
Well,
See,
and I
we
think
have so
this
much
is,
more in common than we do
yeah,
We
I was
separate.
do,
going
and
to
we
say
need to
this is
allow
definitely one
that.
of those issues that affects everybody, regardless of which side of the political
Exactly.
spectrum you're
Mhm.
on, regardless of I mean, even when it comes to like your religious beliefs, every religion who's being, burial or whatever we do for our dead, we have certain traditions and certain things that we're doing when we bury our dead or we whatever it is, and we want to make sure that that's respected. And so it doesn't matter what you believe politically, religiously, whatever. It all
It's,
comes down to,
yeah,
like you said, respect and being very um
it's the
mindful
right
of what's
thing.
going
Yeah,
on. Yeah. And
it's
so,
the
and
right thing to
This
do.
especially I was going to say, and I could see, especially in some of the cemeteries that are not officially abandoned, but may seem abandoned, they're overgrown, the stones are falling over. And I could see where people would walk in and just pick up a stone and walk out, or a piece of a stone or a footstone.
why? But why? You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
Yeah.
I know none of us would do it because we'd all be like, this belongs here. But you could totally see where somebody would be like, I could sell this on the internet, or I could sell this at the oddities market. And people are going to pay a bunch of money because they want a real piece of a headstone in their house. Why is beyond me. But I'm like,
Well, it's like even like souvenir keepers,
mm-hmm,
takers, whatever. Like to say, for instance, Jesse James headstone, you
hmm,
know, it was a big, tall, obelisk headstone. I mean, the actual stone is maybe left a big because people kept chipping and chipping and chipping
right.
to have a piece of that, which is maybe it's
same
almost
thing.
the same thing. Because man, the original
Same
stone
with
was left
Eliza
with,
Whitman's gravestone in Peabody,
yeah.
Diane. It's like for generations, people came there and had picnics with Eliza Whitman and chipped away at her
Hmm.
sandstone gravestone until they had to install a monument. So you definitely are onto something
Mm-hmm,
there. What I love about this law is it doesn't just protect entire gravestones, it protects the smallest bit of a gravestone,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Really cool.
Not just the whole headstone, but like you said, chipping a piece of
Right.
it off and taking it with you because you're a fan of whoever's buried there or whatever. Yeah, I think
Yeah, go to
that's
the gift shop.
Yeah.
take a picture, people. Take
Take
a
a
picture.
bring your sketchbook.
Yes, we live in that modern age where pictures are easy to take and easy to store, either digitally or you can print them or whatever. Just take
Yeah.
the picture.
Because a
3D
modern
scan it,
headstone,
3D
yeah,
scan it. Have
because
print it,
Exactly.
3D print it. Go
a
home and
modern headstone doesn't even come close to the art of either a colonial headstone, a Victorian headstone. It is, yeah, just leave the blessed things alone.
yeah, I'm with you on that for sure.
So,
Yeah.
how did you get involved? How did this? I am going to assume you just did not wake up one morning and decide you were going to do this, but knowing you, you
I think
probably
I
didn't wake
did.
up. I just say you probably did.
We don't underestimate my weird little brain. I have a few things on my agenda. The how I came about it was actually pretty organic, but my idea being ultimately that I'm repairing gravestones, thousands of them. Those repairs will last for a while, but a more long-term solution to some of the problems we have is getting things on the books. Like that's something that I would like to leave as a legacy is, yeah, doing the hard work and repairing them. But when those repairs finally, bite the dust or whatever, I want there to be things that are protecting them into the future. So that's sort of like the idea behind it is as a conservator, I'm approaching 50. I have to start thinking about what legacy do I want to leave behind and how do I want to protect these places that make it easier for future conservators to do this work without having to yell and scream about it or,
Right.
Right.
threaten people or
But
whatever,
it's
whatever
not
thing
this,
I've had to
right.
do.
It's not the same as just seeing a photograph of these headstones, or this was what was here at one time, but now it's gone because somebody decided they needed to steal it, they needed whatever. And we have lost so much of the whole entire story when that happens. It just is not the same looking at a photograph.
Yes. And so my thought being too is I have certain beliefs as a conservator about how gravestones should be handled. Like say something is in really rough shape. We almost never tell people to replace a gravestone. We will bring out all the magic wands to
To
get
Right.
try and
something
fix
back.
it.
We will
I
do
agree.
everything we can.
Yeah.
But say something is that bad, our belief may be a controversial one where when you replace the gravestone, you bury the old one in front of it.
I kind of like that.
It's sacred. It's, if well, as a conservator, that's where I look for fragments is around the stone, you know.
I mean,
Um,
the other thing I could think of doing was, especially if you're in a larger, and I guess this would be more of a Victorian cemetery, maybe, but if there's a chapel or some other building on site where you could say, okay, we've
mhm.
replaced so and so's headstone. Here's the original. This is what it looked like, but it's still on site. It tells you exactly where the actual grave still is if you wanted to go see the updated grave. And so you could still see the original headstone or what's left of it. And
It's
it
like,
would
Yeah, I've
still
seen them
be,
tucked in tombs.
yeah, and it would be there. I was just thinking of when you said that, um, when I went to Italy years and years ago, and we were looking at the David, and we were looking at the statue of the David outside where he was originally installed. Over time, that marble, because he was carved so many centuries ago, started to wear down in the original statue. So they actually moved him inside. So the actual David, the original one that was actually carved, is inside a museum. And they replaced the outside one every, I forget, however many years with a
Mm.
replicated version of him. So you can still see the original one and all the information is there. But outside, what's being done outside is a replica of the original David because they didn't want the stone to deteriorate any further in the elements, which, as you know, can be rather harsh on a lot of stones. So, and I don't know what kind
Right.
of marble. I don't remember because it's been so long. I don't remember what kind of marble he's carved out of or anything. Um, but they wanted to still have it where he was installed for the purposes of why it was installed there in the first place. But now we see a replica of that so that the original stone is protected inside in, better
right.
conditions. So we don't
I'm
lose that piece
of
of art.
two minds about that because oftentimes when a gravestone is put into a place like the Cape Ann Museum or the MFA, it's actually in perfectly good condition. And
Well, yeah, because it's in a museum.
right, but also because slate isn't going to wear down like that. Like,
Well,
it just isn't going to. And I have personal beliefs about these being commissioned by the family and to specifically mark a grave. So these are, um, you know, objects. I'm trying to think of the word really. They're not art, although they are art. They're more applied art. So object that has a purpose with art applied to it, like a beautiful vase that's meant to hold flowers and it has become artistic because of the painting around it, right?
Mhm.
So I would say that gravestones are more of an applied art than an art. And I think their function first and foremost is a utilitarian object to mark a grave, as
Yeah.
opposed to something like the David or something that, doesn't have necessarily that utility, but has that beauty that you want to protect. So I have a lot of opinions about museums taking graveyards just out of the
Well,
cemeteries without any real permission except for like the burying ground owners or like, you know what I mean?
right.
Right.
Well, and that's why I say if you wanted to keep, if you didn't want to bury it, and you wanted to keep the original where somebody could still see it, have it in a building that's on site, just not. And maybe that becomes the individual family's decisions at that point. Like I would be okay,
Yeah.
if you reached out to the descendants and said, okay, they wanted to replace the headstone because it was so far deteriorated that you couldn't read it anymore. You don't know who's buried there unless you have documentation to
Something.
show you who's buried there. Ask them, what do you want to do with this stone?
Mhm.
Do you want it buried on site and we'll put a fresh stone here? Or do you want it in our chapel where we can mark that they're over here and here's what it was before we replaced it?
The
Like,
problem being is that when you're talking about something as old as the stones I work in,
well,
you're
that's true.
talking about 1,000 descendants, and no one's going to have anywhere near. Like, so I have a gravestone of my eighth great grandfather, that's in the Cape Ann Museum, and I had asked that it be removed and put back into the ground because it's perfectly, I can repair it. It's perfectly fine. And the replacement that was made is just a block of granite. It has nothing to
Oh,
do with the actual thing that was removed.
right.
And another descendant was like, no, I want it in the museum. It's just going to stay in the museum. But the middle ground that I reached with the museum is that if you go to the museum to see the gravestone, you don't have to pay admission
Okay.
Oh,
because no
I
one
like
should
that.
pay to see their ancestors' gravestone. That's not
Right.
okay.
Right.
So that's the middle ground that I reached with them. And it's a gray area. Yeah, I'd rather it be in the ground. But at the same time, if it's not going to be in the ground, then it should be visited
At least for
freely.
his descendants, yeah, they can all go and see it without paying to go.
Right.
It's just like people who have ancestors buried in cemeteries on private property. The
Mhm.
property owners can't deny a descendant
right.
generally the ability to be able to visit a grave site that they is part of their family. Like that's they can keep other people out, but you don't keep the descendants out because that's part of who they are.
Yeah.
So it's that same sort of thing. I think that was a good middle ground in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna like show up in the middle of the night and steal a gravestone from a wall. I mean, that the article made it sound like that is a thing I would do, but it
Oh
isn't.
no.
I think they kind of panicked after reading the article that you were asking about how this came about, and
Right.
what it
Yes.
happened was that I was meeting with a reporter about this gravestone that I saved from that auction, the one that I just showed you, the James
Mm-hmm.
Foster fragments.
Hmm.
Um, and before then, I wanted to do my due diligence and make sure there wasn't a law
Right.
protecting it. So I looked up laws, and there's a law for cemetery vandalism, and it's a hefty one. And then there's a law for the sale of veterans, police officer, firefighter markers. But that leaves this area for everyone else that is just like a regular old person that lived here. Those gravestones aren't protected for sale, they're protected from vandalism. Um, so it's just like a little missing area. So I had called my senator just to say, hey, do you know of a law that would cover this? And his legal director was like, no, I don't know of such law. We'll be in contact in January. Totally didn't think about it again. And then I was like, yeah, sure, you
Because you
will.
don't have anything else going on in your life, that
Yeah, but
you're
I
just
also
sitting by
was
the phone
like, all
waiting.
right. Sure, like I'm gonna forget it by January. You definitely are. But they didn't. So I got an email last month that was like, hey, have you been thinking about that language? Because we're ready to file it. And I'm like, no, I haven't actually. I
That's
haven't been
so
thinking about
cool.
it.
Yes, I have. Give
That's
me a minute.
great. Here are these laws from other states that I think will do a good job. And I have a few people who are going to help me write some of the things that I think will fill those loopholes, but I don't want to like add so much stuff that it's unpassable too. And those things
Right.
can be added after it passes. So, well, anyway, so now it is to the point where they're establishing committees and in the Senate. And when it moves into committee, then I can edit it if I want to. I'm on the fence about if I want to, or if I just want to pass it as is. And
Like you said, you don't want to make it unpassable. And so
right,
leaving,
right.
but
I
you
don't
want to
want to.
close the big loopholes too, because you don't want somebody to slip through and be like, well, even though it says this, I technically, and then they slip through and
Right.
still get
Mhm.
away with something.
Yeah, I'm thinking the best way to do that is just to point out Maine and New Hampshire's laws and saying, look, hey, they already passed this and it hasn't been
Do
problematic.
you know when they
Uh,
passed their laws?
1987,
Oh, wow.
Both of them?
but
Oh,
they're around each other.
okay.
But yeah, and Maine's is amazing. And Maine not only is the same language, but goes into how it can be prosecuted. So
Mhm.
Maine's law can be prosecuted in three ways simultaneously. So
Oh,
it isn't
wow.
just one, it's not one fine. It's if this happens, the municipality can sue you, the historical commissions can sue you, and any cemetery commission can sue you
Wow.
simultaneously.
So don't
Wow.
steal the headphones or headstones, folks, or any other
Yeah,
grave
don't
parts.
sell things in Maine.
It'd be interesting to see what um what happened that caused them to do that or felt the need they had to do that. Because
Yeah,
usually stuff like that doesn't happen unless somebody has already done it.
right.
Or in your situation where you like you said earlier, people bring you pieces of headstones or bring you headstones, and then and in this case it was the Foster stone that made you go, we need better protection for this stuff so that it
Yeah, I'm
doesn't
done.
continue to happen.
Yeah. I'm done. I'm done interacting with auction houses that are like, you're a bee, I don't know if we're allowed to cuss on this
But we
Same
know
on
on
what
this
that
you
estate.
meant.
station. But you're a real jerk for wanting to get this out of the auction. How dare you? It's like I don't want to deal with that anymore. Like that's actually really stressful to like go
Yeah.
head to head with somebody who's doing the wrong thing and trying to convince them why it's the wrong thing and trying to be nice and gentle and feminine about it. You know what I mean? Like I I know I'm the you know what in this situation when you have a society that thinks this is okay, the person who stands against it is going to be the person who is called the
All the
Nasty
names,
names.
names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? But it's exhausting. I'm not going to stop it. It's not
Well,
exhausting
and
enough that if you pointed out a gravestone in an auction, I'm not going to publicly shame them
no,
after
and you're
after
not the
trying to get
only
it back.
one doing that kind of thing, though. I know of other people out there who do the same thing when they see these grave goods like this and the headstones and stuff come up at these auctions. They're the ones like you, they're going in and saying, you cannot sell this. It's just not moral to
But
sell this to
now,
anybody online,
yeah.
whoever, or in person, depending on the type of auction it is. Like this should not be something that we're selling. This
But
needs to be
now you
returned
have
to
the
the cemetery.
bill. Now you have the bill that you don't have to tell them any. I mean, you can point it out if it
Mhm.
comes up, but now you
And
have
I
the,
can call the cops. I don't need to
yeah,
go toe to toe anymore.
You
Like,
yeah,
should just
I
be
that's,
don't
like,
want to. It's
please
not
go
like
handle this.
I'm like excited about getting people in trouble or anything. It's more like just save me some energy and give me something I can point to. I'm trying to do the right thing by our cultural heritage. And
And it's
it'll
everybody's cultural heritage because you never know
yeah.
whose stone or item that they have. And again, depending on how old it is, we don't know what entirely, unless there's records, what somebody was feeling or thinking when that stone was created, right? Other than they were probably grieving, right? We know that part. But this is where we go to the cemetery, is where we go to not only remember the people we've lost, but to learn about the people we've lost. And if those stones go missing, who knows how many stories we forget then because we didn't see that. So, I mean, there's so many times when I've researched something that we've actually shared on the podcast where I can't find a marker and I don't even know if one ever existed in some cases. Like, was the grave even ever marked or was it marked and that stone has now gone missing? Or is it just buried in, did it sink and it's buried
Right.
underneath the ground with the grave
hmm
and nobody's gone looking to see if it's done that. There's various reasons why it may or may not be there, but it's really when you find that the marker was actually taken and removed, that becomes very frustrating because it's like, well, why? You didn't
Oh,
need. Now, the only time I have a better, I'm less frustrated by it is if within that generation, right, that whoever died and it's their family members, like a marker was made and then they realized mistakes were made. And I've heard of families that have had markers remade to correct the mistakes on the original markers. And then they end up with the marker
yeah,
that has the
that's
mistakes on it, either the wrong year or a
different.
misspelling or whatever. That's a little different to me. Not that I still want to see it like out and about, but like I can understand why a family would replace and repair the stone or, put a whole different stone. But that's usually the family that did the original burial in the first place may have
Yeah,
done
but
it.
also in those cases, we're probably say that happened in the 1800s. We're 200 years removed from that.
Right.
So we can't possibly know their motivation. And I think having a law that just takes out that gray area of like
Mm-hmm.
wondering is probably for the best because we can come up with 1,000 reasons why something was removed. And sometimes it's incredibly obvious why it was removed.
Right.
But I also don't agree with the sale of it. It's really the sale of it. Like, why are you monetizing a sacred object like this? Um, it isn't necessarily always the possession of it that I find offensive. It's
No, no,
the
it's the
putting a
reselling of
Yeah.
price
it.
tag on it and it being auctioned off to anywhere in the country is
Well, and to
problematic to
somebody
me.
who, especially if it's not like a well, I mean, I almost, not that I say it's any more appropriate, like if it were Elvis's headstone or something, I could see all the Elvis fans out there going, I want his stone if it were auctioned off. But like if it's just somebody that was there in that town for, their lifetime or whatever, and they're not famous or anything, why does anybody else need that headstone? Like,
I mean, why do
why?
they sell coffin dirt?
Well, that's true.
Why do they
Yeah.
sell little bits of punked out coffin that they find? I mean, it's not just gravestones or headstones. It's the actual grave dirt. I've been to oddities markets where people have dug up grave dirt and are selling it. And you're like, why? I mean, I could be a billionaire. I have so much grave dirt. Like I
Mhm.
have grave dirt under my nails right now. I have at least $20 worth of grave dirt. But it's like, why do people
It's in my car quite often. Just FYI, I go in my boots. It's going to be in my car. It's
I haul out gallons of grave dirt.
true. You do more than we do.
I didn't know that I could make money off of it, but I consider that tacky, you know? And I don't think that we should be. I think when it comes to death and dying, we need to hold it in reverence in a
Yeah.
way that we don't hold other things, you know?
Mhm. Oh, I agree. Well, and there's already enough money being made off the death industry in other ways. So
Well,
that I
did
don't
you
always
follow
agree
that,
with there either. So
Jenny? Did you follow that case with Harvard?
which one?
The one where people were donating their bodies for science to Harvard,
Oh no, I
and the
didn't.
mortician was selling their remains to like crafters.
No, I
So
missed
people
that
No.
in
one.
our area were like buying human skin from donated bodies and making like, bags out of it. They're crazy individuals. Like, do you know what I mean? Like when we're talking about gravestones, we're talking about something that seems like not so grim and gross. But if there are people who are doing things like selling human body parts that were donated to Harvard,
I didn't even realize
that's
we were still attempting. I mean, I know there's historical objects that have been made out of human skin. I didn't realize
Yeah.
this was a more modern issue in our
Thing.
country still.
neither did most of the country. And then it happened. And it was like, you have to look
Why?
this up. I mean, Google it. You could Google it. It's
Oh,
and it just happened like a couple years ago.
that's just I missed that one entirely, but oh,
I mean, I've lost so much respect for Harvard because of, I mean, not that I love what they've done to human remains and enslaved stuff, and not that I love any of that, but this was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back, where
yeah.
I'm like, that stuff that happened in the 1800s, our attitudes have changed quite a lot. That's forgivable. You're trying to rectify it. But when you find out that, there's a contemporary case of people
Right.
who are donating
Right?
their bodies, and usually people who are donating their bodies are people who just know they didn't have money for burial, and selling them in this really grotesque way. It was big news around here.
Oh, because I was just because we here at our one of our cemeteries here in Denver, there's a after the bodies are donated and they've done what they're going to do, they're cremated, and the cremains get brought back to this cemetery, and there's a whole section dedicated to this area, and it doesn't cost anything, or it costs very little if the person and the family choose to go that route. But this way their memories are still honored, and the cremains end up in a very respectful place. As far as I
Mhm.
know, nobody here was made into any sort of object out of their, like, once they were done being studied. That's just ugh.
Well, they were being sold. And I don't know how, I don't want to go into vast detail just so that your podcast can remain family friendly, but they were being
We can give
sold
a
to
heads up.
crafters. You know what I mean? The trigger warning.
Yeah,
um,
Wow.
they weren't being put into paupers' graves. They were, you know,
I just don't get it. I
I
mean,
don't either. By comparison, selling a gravestone doesn't sound so cruel all of a sudden, right? But this is the oddities market you're talking about. You're talking about people who are somewhat familiar with this black market, and
mm,
it doesn't seem so crazy to them in comparison,
probably not. But
right? But then there's the rest of us who are like, yeah, we probably don't want to be doing any of that.
I guess my brain would just never even think to go to some of those places. Like
I
I
mean, it
just
was
couldn't
big
do it.
news, and everybody sent it to me for like 2 weeks. Like, did you hear about that? And it's like, I did hear about it.
You're like, and I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Move on.
you
Move
know,
on. Different news.
Wow.
Yeah. No, that's just crazy. Well, I'm glad that you're working on this piece of, again, there's not a ton of legislation necessarily when it comes to the preservation aspects of cemeteries. And we talk about this, and we've talked about this with other guests, and we've talked about it just amongst each other. So often people don't know what to do with certain things when it comes to the preservation, like how far is too far and how much is too much, and what does the law say about this? And there's not a lot of laws in a lot of places. And there's definitely not a uniform law like across the nation that says we can't do this. Like you said,
Right.
your bill is for the state of Massachusetts. So when it passes, because it's going to pass, that will affect everything going on in Massachusetts when it comes to the the sell and resell of the headstones and the monuments and all the particulars.
Cemeteries.
And
Yeah.
Not New Jersey, New Hampshire and Maine have already nipped that in the bud. But like, how many other
mhm,
states haven't, and how many other states
right,
have even thought about it because either nobody within that population is thinking about we maybe need to put this on our books, or they just don't care, I guess. But there's not that uniformity. But if more and more states start to do this, and more people like yourself take this initiative to get this done, then we do
right.
start to create those more uniform laws that work across at least our country in respecting our cemeteries and our sacred spaces like that.
So if somebody
Right.
is interested to see if their state has this type of law on the books, where would one even go to begin to do that
Yeah.
search?
I would, you can certainly search online, but I would say the better path is to contact your senator.
Okay.
Their job is to know the law. So, it's really
Okay.
their job to go through the books and to sift and decide if something already exists and to file it. And you can certainly take a cookie cutter approach to it. Like, feel free to do what I did, take New Hampshire or Maine and just be like, here it is. You know what I mean? This is how other states do it.
Well, like you said,
And
you can always amend it later if you needed to.
you can amend it. And as far as the federal law, you could, and I haven't looked at the federal law
Yeah.
because what I'm dealing with is something that would fall under state law. But
Mhm.
say something was taken and stolen from a national cemetery,
Right.
veterans marker that was federally issued from a national cemetery, that certainly would fall under federal law.
Right.
Okay.
These sort of municipal cemeteries definitely fall under the state. And it would be hard to create an umbrella law that covers all the municipal cemeteries and all
True.
the states. Those really do kind of need to be enacted state by state. But not knowing what there is federally, if there is a hole in something
Hmm.
having to do with our national cemeteries, certainly that should be buttoned up, right?
Right. The national cemeteries. And I would think even maybe even through the National Park Service and some of that other stuff,
Yeah,
depending on how
cemeteries on
it's,
their land.
because
Mhm.
there are plenty of National Park Service or cemeteries within their lands, and that, even one of the cemeteries that I like to go to on a frequent basis here is actually maintained by the Park Service because of where it's located. So they actually do the majority of the basic maintenance for it,
Oh,
right?
that's
So
cool.
Mhm.
if somebody were to steal from that particular cemetery, I'm assuming that would go beyond our state laws in Colorado. I don't know because I don't actually know what
I
our
think
laws
it
look
would
like in
fall under
Colorado.
them all the same. Say Colorado had a
I would think
state
you
law,
would
I
at
think
least start there. Yeah.
it would fall under it, but to make it a broader law,
Mhm.
it certainly seems like a federal, a contender for a federal law to me if there isn't one already.
Yeah. So something to keep in mind. But if you, as a listener, live somewhere where you feel like something like this law is needed, like if you've seen these sales happening, these auctions happening, all of these things, and you're like, what do I do? You do exactly what Rachel has done. You go to your
Yeah,
senator and you say, look, we need to enact a law and a policy about this because otherwise this is going to continue to happen and we're going to continue to see these very sacred spaces being sold off and these
Yeah.
objects
Well,
sold off to
mhm.
people who have no connection to the original, the death and the burial ground. So uh start small and
yeah,
work from
And
there.
be educated to what is on the books to
Mm-hmm.
know what needs to be put on the books.
yeah. And I absolutely have like political aspirations. Like I see myself running for state rep or senate. But at this point, all I know about Bills was literally the song from Schoolhouse Rock.
I was
Like
gonna say
I probably listened to that about 100 times. Like, and now it's in committee. Like,
that and Legally Blonde too. Okay, that
oh, I
movie
had
was
to rewatch that.
because
Yeah,
she gets her bill passed in
absolutely.
that movie.
Like, don't think that you need to be like a political powerhouse. Like, I feel like
No.
this is a good place to actually learn about bills because it's like what's offensive about this law. Like,
Mm-hmm.
everyone should be behind it. And I think
Right.
my ask is that if
Exactly.
you're in Massachusetts, if you have ancestors from Massachusetts who have graves in Massachusetts, belong to a descendants group, some sort of historical society, that you contact your senators or you contact it in the case of people who have ancestors that are in Massachusetts because you have a right to fight for them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't live here, contact our senators and
Oh
let
yeah,
them know that Bill SD 2426 is one that will help protect their graves moving forward.
I love that. I do have people buried there, so
Contact our senators.
I may too. Oh, I know I do.
I
Duh.
know you do. We both do.
Yeah.
We might be
Yeah, we
contacting
do
some
think of
senators.
this as like if you live in Massachusetts, but our heritage, regardless of what your background is, if you can trace it to Massachusetts, you have a horse in this race, you know?
Yeah, I think, yeah. So, folks, listeners in Massachusetts, if you want to see this bill progress and get passed, into committee and actually get passed and put into law, definitely contact your senators. And you can call. There's always, if you go to the websites for any of your state representatives, their websites will give you their phone numbers. They will give you ways to email. You can do snail mail if you really want to, but I would, to push it through faster, I would do the phone
Mhm.
call or the email because they're going to pay more attention to that right away. Um,
Yeah.
and they'll work with that. But the more they hear
Mhm.
from people who are concerned about the selling of the cemetery items, the more they will put emphasis on making this an important committee and getting it
Right.
passed. If they
Mhm.
don't get enough,
Especially like if you're a gravestone conservator
mm-hmm,
or somebody who has been to an oddities market and seen a gravestone, those firsthand stories of the gravestones that you couldn't save are incredibly valuable to me.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
And I know there's plenty of people out there doing exactly what you're doing with trying to stop those sales. And I see it all the time on social media where somebody is so upset and they've come across it and then they're trying to figure out how to get it stopped. And it can be, like you said, really exhausting and really difficult if
yeah,
there's no law to back it up. If
Right.
there's nothing that backs you up, then they're like, oh, the people doing it are just going to do
Like,
it,
yeah.
regardless of what you say or do. So it makes it really difficult. So being able to have something in your corner and have that law in your corner to say, yeah, you can't do this. This is illegal. Then it's going to stop. And if enough of us start making these laws across the country, we're not going to see this stuff pop up in auctions anymore and stuff like that. Um, Not to say that they still wouldn't on black market systems and stuff like that, but it would reduce a lot more of it than what currently happens now.
yeah. Thank you for saying that.
I would love to see less of the frustrated people who are trying. Like I said, I personally never come across it, fortunately, I guess. But I don't want to be that person
You would
that
just
has
have
to
to
come
Google.
across it. But
You would come across it if you Googled. Like it's there are specific auction places that already have rules, like eBay. If you see something on eBay, you contact eBay.
right.
And you say somebody's trying to sell a cemetery object. But I've done that before, and all the seller did was like change his tune about what it was. He was trying to sell coffin wood, and he's like, wood from a place. Like all the, after I had contacted eBay. So it's not perfect, this law. I can think
No.
about 1,000 things that are like, what if, who's going to take all these cemetery objects that can't be put back? What happens then? What happened? Like, I have a lot of what ifs, even myself, that are like, how are we going to prove where things belong? Like if it's a flag holder, those flag holders don't have names on them. How do you know what cemetery that was taken from? Where is this repository going to be for some of these objects that won't find homes?
Right.
How are we going to redistribute those? Because in my mind, you have all these flag holders. You could redistribute Revolutionary War flag holders to Revolutionary War veterans that don't have them anymore. Or you know what I mean? Like how will this be handled and by whom? I'm not a government agency. I don't have the right to take them myself and house them in my house. I would be in violation of the law in my own way, right? But how do we find the places who will safeguard them and won't just toss them into the woods like they were the first time, or
that will be the next step. Let's get through this one and then
Yeah.
and then we make that next one and figure out, like you said, where that stuff goes and who's responsible for it. And I love the idea of being able to, if it's not name specific, like the flag markers and stuff, to be able to just redistribute them across an area where you're going to have those particular types of graves.
Yeah,
I
just came up with that one because of
I love that idea. I'm like, if you want to put, like you said, you have all these Revolutionary War soldiers, and if you could give any of them a little flag marker, put their little flag in it.
Yeah.
And
so when will you know if this bill gets passed? Is there a deadline for people to comment?
It's probably going to take a long while, but there's no wrong time to contact your senators. Like it's not even in committee yet, but that's okay. You can still contact your senators so that they're alerted to it. You can contact them on every step of the way. When it goes into committee, contact them again. When it's about to be voted on, you track it online, contact them again. When it moves to the House, contact them then. There's no too much contacting people when it comes to trying to pass a law that might easily end up in a crack somewhere, So,
And I'll put in the show notes for this episode, I'll put some of at least at the state level, some of the information for Massachusetts. And then for your actual, like maybe local one, I'm not going to list every single municipality in Massachusetts and all of that, but we'll get you started.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there's just a mass.gov or something.
Yeah, something like that. So I'll list all of that in our show notes. And that way, if you're in Massachusetts and you want to do that and contact, but or if, like Rachel said, if you're outside of Massachusetts, but you have ancestors buried there somewhere and you want
I
to
mean,
make
because
sure
these
this law
gravestones
passes.
make it well outside. They don't stay in Massachusetts once they're auctioned, you know?
Oh yeah, they
Right.
get them the heck out so nobody knows where they came from. Exactly. So
This is the beginning of this country. I mean, of course, we had 13,000 years of indigenous history before colonization, but as far as this country as a colonized country,
right.
Massachusetts and the colonies are where it started. So this
Yep.
isn't specific to Massachusetts, but specific to all the places where those descendants, ended up and manifested their
I
destiny.
was going to say
So
all that New England area, and even further south, if you go down along the coast, anywhere along the coast, really, all the way down to Florida. I
Yeah.
mean, those graves are just as old down there as some of the ones up in Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Maine.
yeah,
So, and again, I've seen it where not just New England and not just your those East Coast states, but you have a lot of these older graves that are in the South that have run into the exact same problem where people are reselling them all the time.
yeah. And the other side of it too, I mean, is if you have one,
Turn it
bring
over.
it to your local, cemetery commission or your local historical commission and have them figure out where it goes. Like
Right.
I would argue that if you have one in your house right now before this law is passed, it's a great time to return it without any repercussion. And also like is that is that too bully? But
No.
seriously,
No,
like
I think
there's no
it's good
repercussion.
because once the law passes, there could be repercussions,
There could
and
be repercussions, but also like that's not the spirit of the law. Feel free
right.
to like dropping something off in the middle of the night in the dark cover of darkness. Feel free to leave a burial object at your historical commission with a little note or like,
All right, your
like
This is for
cemetery.
you. Please take care of it.
Or
Well,
leave it
and
at your city cemetery or something. Take it to somebody who will put it back in the right place, or at least know the
yeah.
next step.
And
right.
you can call me, just don't leave it on my doorstep because
Because
Oh,
then you're
I
in
you know,
possession.
because then I'm gonna have to figure out which cemetery commission
yeah.
to give it to.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't know, like if you know the cemetery and you know who's in charge of that cemetery, take it to them. If you don't know the cemetery, it's just there. Yeah, like you said, the historical commissions, whoever is there, and say, hey, I have this. And it can even be as simple as, I mean, I've heard of people buying houses and then they find these headstones being used as like pavers in the backyard and they flip them over and they're like, oh, I
Oh,
have
we've
a
been making
headstone.
fudge
And
on
why is
this.
there a headstone in my backyard all of a sudden? So if you have found yourself in that situation, this is what you do with that headstone so that it hopefully gets
Yeah.
back to where it should go.
Yeah, and I think there's some grandfathering where this probably
Yeah.
predates the law. And
Oh, yeah.
you know, let me just show you before we just sign off. I have a few photos of
Yeah,
things
Yeah.
that
please.
you may or may not want to share. I have I can't remember what I threw in this folder, but just quickly, here's a gravestone that was found in a storage auction, a storage locker auction.
Oh my gosh.
That to this day we don't know where it
Oh,
belongs and
wow.
is now in possession of the Gloucester Historical Commission because that is where the storage locker was.
Wow.
And we've
Oh.
never been able to figure out where it goes. Um, you
What
still there?
Mrs. H.
Yeah.
Kendall is the name on it. So I just realized because you're showing a screenshot from your social media post.
So this is the returning of the Bowditch stone from Situate,
Oh,
Massachusetts to Salem, Massachusetts. These are
yeah.
the gravestone for the Bowditch children.
Mm-hmm.
And this was actually found in a house when it was bought. The house was bought, and this was hidden behind a shelving unit and against a wall.
Oh, wow.
So when they tried to redo the garage, um, they found this gravestone, and the Situate Historical Commission and the group that found it came up and returned it to me. So this is back in Salem. It's not in the ground yet. But I would argue that it belongs with the Bowditch stones at Charter Street Cemetery.
Yay.
And the very last thing, and this isn't, so I got better. I don't, sorry, I shared a weird screenshot.
No,
No, there was nothing wrong with that.
I liked it
Um,
because your screenshot had the name, which I couldn't read from here, that's on the headstone.
oh,
So I
so
was
the
telling
last one I
listeners, if
wanted,
you know who Mrs. H. Kendall is and where she's buried, and she's missing her stone, we have the stone.
well, the Gloucester the Cemetery Commission has the stone now.
Well, yes, but it's
Because
in possession.
I don't want my barn to be like the place that gravestones go to die. But this is one that this is a fascinating story to me. This is one I was contacted about a few months ago. It was found in the basement of Peabody City Hall. And I did I did the research and I found that it should belong to was a unmarked grave at Old South Cemetery for Abigail Buttman Hooper. And
Mhm.
it's funny,
BBH.
after I put it back in the ground, I had called a friend of mine, and I have full permission to share this. And I said, "Oh, let's hang out. I'm rarely in Salem anymore. I just returned this footstone to the ground." And he was like, "Oh, I brought that footstone in back in 2007
Oh, wow.
after small world, after seeing it in a curio cabinet of somebody I knew. And when that person died, I specifically asked to get that footstone so I could bring it back to Peabody. And he gave it to the Peabody City Hall, who must have just kind of lost it in the shuffle.
Right. They like
And
somebody put it aside and said, okay, we'll figure this out later.
and he believes that it was stolen.
Mm,
Like without giving away the identity of the person who potentially stole it just because he's not alive to stand up for himself.
right.
Um, they did live in the neighborhood and I guess we're prone to those sorts of activities. So
Mhm.
this is one of those things that could have easily ended up in an oddities market if my friend hadn't
Seen it. Yeah.
intervened. And this was back in 2007. How many years have passed that it was in
Right.
Peabody Town Hall? And I only just returned it this summer.
I'm so glad you're able to give it back, though.
That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, these are the success stories. I have dozens of these, gravestones that I were on the side of the road in front of the Family Dollar. Like, I have dozens of these stories, but that's not accounting for the things that aren't being returned and are still sitting in people's living rooms or, you know.
Right.
Well,
Hidden behind the bookshelf.
we have one here
Yeah.
that one of our volunteers found by a dumpster. And it was a
Oh,
fairly
yeah.
good size headstone. And he had it for the longest time. He didn't know what to do with it. Nobody else knew what to do with it. And then we finally figured out where she went and we put it back. But it does, oh, it does happen. I mean, it's everywhere,
And
unfortunately.
each one is fascinating. Like,
Yes.
Hmm.
I
Mhm.
mean, just Google it. Google Lost Gravestone Epic Preservation. You'll see story after story after story of this gravestone was being used as a mooring in a clam flat, or this gravestone was found in this place, or, like
Oh, I've
we've
seen them,
done
they're being used as cutting boards and rolling or not cutting boards, but like for rolling out your Pido and
fudge
stuff
and
like that.
yeah,
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen those and I'm
yeah.
always like, why?
Why?
But it
Yeah,
could be
that's
really exciting if you return something to be like,
right.
hey, so and so alerted us to this problem, and now they're a part of history.
I love
It's
that.
not all bad. It's not all about shame.
No, 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 no. That would be, well, hopefully anybody and everybody who's listening to this, and if there's a headstone hanging around your house, you don't know where it came from, return it to, if you think it came from your local cemetery, then return it there and allow the people who know what they're doing to hopefully put it back where it belongs.
Hmm. And maybe we remark some graves that haven't been marked in a very long time,
Exactly.
which
Yeah,
is the genealogist in me says, please remark those graves so that those of us trying to figure out family histories have something physical
Right.
to go to because it's really
yeah,
hard when they're not marked. So,
yeah.
in fact, I'm working on a story for the podcast it was supposed to be a Tuesday tidbit, and it has gone through several rabbit holes. So it became more than a tidbit. And I was like, forget that. This is going to go past that, and it'll be a whole episode at some point.
It's now a tad bit.
Yeah, it's a lot of it. But it's one of those things where this family that I'm researching, I found obituaries and stuff, so I know where the cemetery is, and I've actually gone back to the cemetery. I don't think all of those graves are marked. And I'm feeling like most of them should have been marked because they owned a marble works. And so I'm like, where's the rest of the headstones?
Yeah,
So,
is it a cobbler has the worst shoes situation, or
I don't know. And that's the part I'm trying to figure out.
Probe? Did you probe the area?
No, I haven't done that. And I haven't talked to the cemetery itself yet. Like the one day I was there recently, I wanted to go in and talk to them at the office, but there was a big funeral happening. And I was like, I'm not going to go in the office today.
Yeah.
I'm not going to interrupt them. Their hands are like, their parking lot was full. All the like there were a lot of people there for that funeral. So I was like, I'm not even going to bother to go in and talk to anybody right now, but I really do need to go in there and see if I can learn a little bit more, because I think there should be more markers than what I'm seeing, unless they're in a whole nother section of the cemetery that I'm just not even thinking to look in. And it is a big cemetery, so it's a possibility. Yeah. So that story will come sometime, hopefully maybe this year.
Good.
But yeah, I would be curious. It started with one stone, and now it's spiraled into this big thing of this whole family that I have no connection to at all. But I was like, I'm just curious, and I thought I'd write a little blog post about it, and it's way more than a blog post. So
right on. That's awesome.
It's fine. It's fine. It's just also frustrating when I'm like I said, I went back to the cemetery to try and find certain markers, and they're not where I thought they would be. So I don't know if there ever were, or if they've been removed, or what. So
yeah.
I mean, probing helps. Ground penetrating radar might help a little bit. I'm trying to buy a ground penetrating radar unit this year, but they are very expensive.
Yeah.
But we'll see. What,
because we've had people come out that were colleges and do it. Is there a college close that might?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly tried to get Salem State to communicate with me about it, but they haven't. But at the same time, if anybody should have one, it should be me, right? Like,
yeah, because you're in the cemetery all the time.
Like, let's find a way to come up with that $20,000, and if I had a nonprofit, maybe I'd be able to write a grant for it. So maybe I'll start a nonprofit.
That's next.
Yeah,
let's get the bill passed.
Yeah.
Let's do that. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes. And hopefully, again, listeners, if this is something that's important to you, contact those senators. We'll have the information in the show notes to get you started. And if it's something you feel your own state needs, start with like she said, start with your senators, contact them and say, look, this is a problem. We need to fix it. And of course, they're the ones to fix it because they know the law. So let them do that. But be persistent and be a Rachel in this case. And
be a Rachel.
Be a Rachel.
And make sure that you don't just let it go. If you want to see the changes happen so that your cemeteries are definitely protected, don't not contact them and keep bugging them.
Don't wait for someone else to do it.
Yeah, don't wait and think somebody else is going to do it for you, because typically it doesn't happen then forever if we wait for somebody else to do it. So
yep, exactly.
You have to be the doer.
Yeah, and if somebody wants to help me to be a Rachel, the last time somebody used a name like that was be a Karen or like.
No, we want being a Rachel is the positive one.
Yes.
Be a Rachel. It's a good thing.
And if you want to
be a Rachel,
specifically, you do not want to be a Rachel. It's very chaotic. But I promise. Don't do it. But if I can always use volunteers too to help contact people, do press releases and contact historical commissions and stuff. I'm always looking for people to come up with all the lists of contact information. Yeah. So even once it is passed, there's going to need to be some kind of information campaign that lets auction houses and oddities markets know that this now exists, so
Yeah, because they're so used to being able to do it that they might continue
they
to
need
do
be
it.
informed. Mhm.
Right. And if we don't spread that word, who's going to? So, I can always use people to help me stay organized on this. So,
Yeah.
you know.
I don't know if you're a college student and you're trying to get into this area, this might be a great little side project for you guys to do too. Or you're
Yeah.
retired and you have the extra time. I'm not saying that anybody who's not retired and working all that can't do it too, but I'm just saying if you find that you have some time and you want to devote it to this, Rachel will be more than grateful.
I will be. I really will be.
And I will have all of Rachel's contact
Yep.
information too. So if you want to talk more, get in contact with her about this, or you can do one of those things that Rachel's asking for, you can totally get in touch with her. Or if you have questions about preservation and conservation, she is more than happy to help you with that too. So she's one of the best. So
Aw, you're the
I,
best.
we both Diane and I say you're one of the best, and you're at the very top of our list of
Yeah,
conservationists
definitely.
for
Well, you're the
cemetery.
best. You don't know how much I was looking forward to talking to you guys
Oh,
today. Like, you're like the
well,
highlight. You are the actual highlight of my night.
aw. Well, I'm
Well,
glad we could be a bright spot
for
for you.
us too. Believe me, for
Yeah.
us too.
Be a Jenny, be a Diane. Can't be a Rachel.
That would
Yes,
be
I
scary.
love that.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more about today's episode, visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you'll find additional links in our show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your support helps others find our show and discover all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
You can also follow us on social media for cemetery facts, photos, quotes, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery and on X at Ord Extra Sim. If you'd like to help support us financially, you can donate a cup of coffee by clicking on the coffee cup icon on our website or YouTube, or purchase some of our fabulous Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery merchandise through our store link.
Until we meet again.